In the cold, damp woods of Philadelphia, on a winter's day in 1957, a college student was checking his muskrat traps. It was a routine day until he saw it. A cardboard box, just sitting there, off the side of a dirt road. It looked out of place. Curious, he approached. He gave it a nudge with his foot. What he found inside would launch a mystery so haunting, so enduring, it would echo through the decades. It was the body of a little boy, naked, bruised, and wrapped in a cheap flannel blanket. He had no name. No one knew where he came from. And to this day, no one knows for sure who put him in that box. This is the story of the boy in the box, America's most heartbreaking cold case. The date was February 25th, 1957. The student, whose name was never publicly released to protect his privacy, immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that would chill even the most seasoned veterans. The boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, was small for his age. His hair had been recently crudely cut, perhaps in a haste to disguise him. His fingernails had been trimmed with unsettling care. But the most bizarre detail was his body. It was spotlessly clean, so clean in fact that investigators believed he had been thoroughly washed shortly after his death, before being placed in the box. The box itself became a key piece of evidence. It was a JCPenney bassinet box from a model sold in the area, but the serial number had been meticulously torn away, making it impossible to trace directly to the purchaser. Inside, with the boy, was only a men's handkerchief, a faded blue scarf, and a comb. It was a scene of chilling contrasts, a child's body, treated with a grotesque parody of care, discarded like trash. At the morgue, the medical examiner, Dr. Joseph Spellman, began the grim task of finding answers. The boy's cause of death was determined to be a homicide, but the specific reason was clouded. He had multiple bruises on his body, a large scar on his chin, and an unusual L-shaped scar on his ankle. An initial autopsy suggested he might have been beaten to death. But a second, more thorough examination years later would point to a different, more sinister possibility: asphyxiation. The boy had been smothered. But by whom? And why? The Philadelphia Police Department threw everything they had at this case. They released a photograph of the boy, a haunting portrait of a child with a shy, hopeful expression. They called him the boy in the box, and later, America's unknown child. The photo was printed on flyers and posters that were plastered across the city, the state, and eventually, the entire country. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The police department was flooded with thousands of calls. Parents who were missing children came forward, hoping against hope. But each lead, every potential match, turned into a dead end. The boy's identity remained a ghost. One of the most promising early leads came from a man in New Jersey. He claimed to have rented a room to a couple and their young son. He said the boy bore a striking resemblance to the one in the poster. But one day, the couple and the boy were simply gone. They left behind furniture and personal belongings. Investigators chased this lead relentlessly, but it eventually went cold. The couple was never found, and their connection to the boy in the box was never proven. It was just one of countless whispers in a case full of echoes. As the months turned into years, the case grew colder. The initial flurry of activity faded, but the boy's memory was kept alive by a dedicated few. One of them was a man named Sam Weinstein, a retired Philadelphia police inspector who couldn't let the case go. He became the unofficial custodian of the boy's story, maintaining the files and following any glimmer of a hope, no matter how faint. He was determined to give this child a name. Then, in the late 1990s, a new theory emerged, one that seemed so plausible it was almost accepted as fact. A woman named Remington Bristow, who had worked as a hospital attendant and had become obsessed with the case, came forward with a stunning story. She believed the boy was a child named Jonathan, born to a woman whose stepfather ran a foster home. According to Bristow's theory, Jonathan had been accidentally killed, and the family, in a panic, disposed of his body to avoid an investigation into their shady foster care operation. Bristow even claimed to have found a blanket identical to the one in the box at the foster home's former location. For a while, it seemed like the mystery was solved. But there was a problem. There was no hard evidence, no birth certificate for Jonathan, no proof he ever existed. The theory, as compelling as it was, remained just that, A theory. The boy in the box was still nameless. The decades rolled on. The world changed. Forensic science advanced in ways the 1950s detectives could never have imagined. The case file, now yellowed and brittle, sat in a dusty archive. But the people of Philadelphia hadn't forgotten. The boy had been buried in a potter's field, but in 1998, his body was exhumed, and he was reinterred at a cemetery in Philadelphia, under a headstone that read, "America's Unknown Child." Citizens donated money for his tombstone, a promise that he would never be forgotten again. The hope was that one day, technology would be advanced enough to finally give him back his name. That day seemed to arrive in 2022. Investigators, working with the Vidocq Society, a group of criminologists and forensic experts, decided to try something new. They exhumed the boy's body once more. This time, they weren't looking for bruises or scars. They were looking for DNA, and they found it. They successfully extracted a viable genetic profile from the boy's teeth. Then they turned to the revolutionary power of genetic genealogy. This is the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer. Scientists can take a DNA sample and compare it to massive public databases of people who have submitted their DNA to learn about their ancestry. By finding distant relatives, they can begin to build a family tree, branching out through generations until they zero in on a likely candidate. It's a painstaking process, a digital detective story that can connect a speck of genetic material to a living person. The team working on the boy in the box case sent his DNA profile to a lab, and they waited. For months, they followed the digital breadcrumbs, building a tree that spanned decades. They chased down leads, interviewed potential relatives, and slowly, painstakingly closed in on the truth. They were getting closer. They had a name, a family, a history. The secret that had been buried for 65 years was about to be unearthed. On December 8, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Commissioner held a press conference. The room was thick with anticipation. For the first time, it felt like an answer was coming. The commissioner stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke the words that so many had waited a lifetime to hear. "We have identified the boy in the box," he said. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Joseph Zarelli. He was born on January 13, 1953. He would have been 4 years old when he died. He was a real child, a son, maybe a brother. He had a name. The decades of anonymity were over. The boy in the box was Joseph. It was a monumental breakthrough, a victory for science and for the unwavering dedication of those who refused to let him be forgotten. The nation breathed a collective sigh of relief. A mystery had been solved. But had it? The revelation of Joseph's name didn't bring the closure everyone had hoped for. Instead, it just opened the door to a new, even more perplexing set of questions. The identification was just the first chapter of a new, more complicated story. Investigators learned that Joseph and his siblings had been victims of horrific abuse. They had been removed from their parents' home by the Department of Public Welfare. Joseph, it turned out, had been placed in a foster home. And then the trail goes cold. Official records show that Joseph was discharged from his foster care placement in August of 1957, but he was found dead in that box in February of 1957, 6 months before his official discharge date. This glaring discrepancy in official records is a red flag. It points to a system that failed him, a system that may have lost track of a vulnerable child, a child who was then murdered. So the question is no longer, who is this boy? The question is, what happened to Joseph Zarelli? And it's a question with a labyrinth of potential answers. Was he killed by his abusive biological parents? Did they somehow get him back and then silence him forever? Was he killed by his foster parents? Was his death a tragic accident that was covered up in a panic? Or was it something else entirely, something more sinister? The identity of his parents has been confirmed, but both are now deceased. They were never considered suspects in the original investigation, and now they can never be questioned. What did they know? What did they hide? We may never know. And what about the foster family, the people who were supposed to protect him? Their identities have been protected by law, but investigators are looking into them. What happened in that home? Was Joseph the quiet, haunted child we see in the photograph? Was he scared? Did he cry out for help that never came? The most haunting part of this new chapter is that someone, somewhere, knows the truth. A sibling, a cousin, a neighbor from that time. Someone must have known Joseph. Someone must have wondered where he went. The fact that he was never reported missing is a tragedy in itself. It speaks to a life lived in the shadows, a life that was so precarious that his disappearance could go unnoticed by the very systems designed to protect him. The case of the boy in the box has transformed. It's no longer just a story about an unidentified victim. It's a story about systemic failure, about a child who fell through the cracks of a broken system. It's a story about abuse, neglect, and the dark secrets that families keep. The discovery of his name didn't solve the mystery. It just deepened it. It gave a face and a name to the tragedy, but it also exposed a darker, more complex truth. Today, Joseph Zarelli rests under a new headstone, one that bears his full name. He is no longer America's unknown child. He is Joseph. But his murderer or murderers have never been brought to justice. The person who washed his small body, who cut his hair, who placed him in that JCPenney box on a cold winter's day is still out there. Or perhaps they took their secrets to the grave. The final, unresolved question hangs in the air, as heavy and as cold as the Philadelphia wind on that February day in 1957. We know who Joseph was, but we still don't know the story of his final moments. We don't know the why. And until we do, the ghost of the boy in the box will continue to haunt us. A silent, heartbreaking reminder of a promise broken and a life stolen. What do you think happened to Joseph Zarelli? Was his death a result of the abuse he suffered at home? Did it happen in the foster care system? Or is there another explanation entirely? This is a case that has perplexed experts for over 65 years, and now, with a name to the mystery, the theories are more important than ever. Head down to the comments section below and share your thoughts. Let's try to piece this puzzle together. This story is a powerful reminder of why we must never give up on the voiceless. If you were moved by Joseph's story, please hit that like button to help others find it. Share this video to keep his memory alive. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into history's most compelling mysteries. Thank you for watching.